to introduce our authors, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Dray. She is an award-winning author whose work has been translated into numerous languages and consistently ranks among the most anticipated reads of the year. She lives in Maryland with her husband, their cats, a wonderful collection of history books, and she brings to her writing a background as a former lawyer. Laura Kamoie holds a doctorate in early American history from the College of William and Mary and has authored 2 nonfiction works on early America. A former professor of early American history at the U.S. Naval Academy, she lives in Annapolis, where she continues to bring her deep scholarly insight to her story. Please join me in welcoming our authors this evening, Stephanie Dray and Laura Kamoie.
We're on the wrong side.
We have favorite song.
Yeah.
Sorry.
First of all, we are so honored to be here tonight and to see all of you turn out for this meeting and for us and to talk about Abigail Adams. This is our thank you, good clap, yay! This is our 13th day on tour, and I think we've saved the best for last because today we got to visit some of the historical sites. We went to Peacefield, and we kind of freaked out there and sniffed the wisteria and the lilacs. And then we went to the parish church and we saw the statue of Abigail and the quotes. And so we're still a little bit in awe, and we are amazed that you mostly get to live around here. This is an amazing historic place. So we're also slightly nervous to be giving this talk in front of people who are possibly more familiar with the subject matter than us. So all I ask is that if we mess up in our talk and make a mistake, wait until after to tell us. We will correct it in future versions. Okay. All right. Now, Laura, did you want to talk about the basket that we may have?
Yep. Okay, so we brought some goodies. Some are free, help yourself to the bookmarks. There are some stickers. You all know Abigail is highly quotable, so we brought some fun swag. If you would like it, help yourself. We also have our newsletter sign up, so if you'd like deleted scenes or extra news or giveaways and the like, you're welcome to sign up for that. And please make sure that you have signed in for the meeting, because we also brought a raffle basket and we'll be using the sign-in sheet as the way to choose the lucky winner of a basket of some extra goodies. So just to let you know that, and we'll get started.
All right. I think, does this work? It does. Okay. All right, I'm going to take it away. So we called our new novel A Founding Mother because we feel that it belongs to Abigail Adams more than it belongs to any other woman in American history. And our novel tells her story from the time that she's a young mother to an ardent patriot, to First Lady and America's most influential founding mother. Now today, Abigail is remembered around the country primarily for 2 things. First, her very extensive correspondence with her husband, John Adams. There are over 1,000 extant letters. And she's also remembered for being the wife of one president and the mother of another. But being the matriarch of a political dynasty is really only a small part of her story. And so what really motivated us to want to write about her are all the other ways that you can consider her. For example, she was a mother in a time of war. She was a pioneering advocate for women. She was an entrepreneur. She was a world traveler. And she became the most important political advisor to her husband, the president. But most central to her life was motherhood. Not just as the mother of 4 children who survived to adulthood, but also as a mother to the new nation that she helped birth.
Now, you might be surprised to learn that initially we were going to avoid writing a novel about Abigail Adams. And the expertise in this room might have been what? No, I'm just kidding. We love your expertise. One of the major reasons was that we are huge fans of the HBO miniseries on John Adams and great admirers of the actress Laura Linney's portrayal of Abigail. In fact, that's on our bucket list. If we can meet Laura Linney, see her in her costume, like that would just be the best thing. And so initially we wondered, well, what could we add that was new and original to the story of who Abigail Adams was? But of course, one of the things that really stands out in that is how much time they spend apart during their marriage. And so we asked, well, what was Abigail doing while John was away on all of his various commitments? And those commitments totaled over about 10 years of time, cumulatively, that they were apart. And the answer to that was she was doing a whole lot. So that was the first thing that inspired us to think that we could write a novel about Abigail and we could say something new and unique about her. The second thing that inspired us to look harder at Abigail was that this year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, right? There are America 250th events happening all over the country, and will continue to do so for the rest of the year. And so we really, especially with how much of her words have survived, thought she's the perfect person, actually, with how resonant and relevant many of her quotes are, to talk to us about what this anniversary means, what it means to be an American, and the like. There's another consideration that we also always put into all of our novels. You might know that this is actually our third or fourth, depending on how you count it, novel that we've written together. The first one was called America's First Daughter. It was about Thomas Jefferson's eldest daughter, Patsy. The second one was called My Dear Hamilton, and it was about Eliza Schuyler Hamilton, the wife of Alexander. We also did one with a couple of other authors called Ribbons of Scarlet. It was about the women of the French Revolution. And so with each choice of protagonist, we are always sort of asking, who will allow us to tell a substantively new story of the Revolutionary era? Because we don't want to pick a lady who has similar characteristics and life experiences as someone we've already written about, because then how do we say something new? How do we give you a new insight into this era, a new perspective of what the challenges and sacrifices were? And, Abigail, for a lot of reasons, gave us that ability to say something new about this era. There are a couple of reasons for that. Now, you all are going to know all of this, but this is our 13th tour stop in the last 10 days or so. So I'm going to go over it anyway. First of all, Abigail had a different perspective than either of the other ladies that we wrote about because she was older. She was already a wife and a mother by the time the actual battles erupted, and she was already well on her way to having a family even in the lead up to the conflict actually breaking out. And also, really important to her story and how we can say something new about the revolution is where she lived and where she was from, right here in Massachusetts. You may know this, but Massachusetts really has a number of superlatives when it comes to Revolutionary War history. First of all, it's where the war began. The people of Massachusetts were the earliest and the rowdiest of the protesters against British rule. And as a result of that, Massachusetts was also the colony that was most punished and most severely punished by the British for that protest, especially that little midnight lark of throwing some tea in the harbor. The British really didn't like that, and that was the cause of a lot of the most strident reprisals. The first battles of the Revolutionary War took place here, and Abigail saw some of the consequence of that marching right past her front door. And yes, we were extremely surprised by how close that front door is to the actual road today. That was really cool to see. The colony of Massachusetts contributed more soldiers to the Continental Army than any other colony. And so for all of these reasons, this really unique experience of being in the place where the spirit of America really takes root first and strongest, made it clear that Abigail should be our next book, and that she could be front and center in her own story.
Now, before we put her front and center, though, we think we should give at least a little bit of attention to her mister, President John Adams. Now, despite the absolutely essential role that he played in founding the United States, he is arguably one of the most overlooked and underrated presidents of this era, maybe not here in Massachusetts, but in the rest of the country. So despite being the first president to actually serve in what is now Washington, D.C., there is no monument to him there yet. There's a foundation that's working on it. We are helping. And if you are interested in getting involved, please see us during the book signing and we'll direct you to the right place, because they have grand plans, including part of the monument to be dedicated to Abigail, which would make her the first American woman to have a national monument in D.C. So we're very excited about that. Yeah. I got so excited I lost my place. All right. So in popular culture in America, John Adams, there is the HBO special, and there's McCullough's book, but in popular culture, he's usually overlooked. Even in the Hamilton musical, he gets maybe like one line, right? Welcome to the Adams administration. And then we skip right over it. And we think maybe John is overlooked because he only served one term as president, or maybe it's because he was sort of sandwiched between the larger-than-life Virginians, Washington and Jefferson. And I'm sure you know, Washington and Jefferson were tall and handsome and charismatic, and John was short and stout and famously cranky. So maybe that's why he is not better remembered. But we think he should be better remembered, and here's why. And I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but he was recognized for being brilliant and principled in his own time, which is very rare. You might know that Ben Franklin did not like him very much, but said he was always an honest man. He wrote pamphlets and books on governmental theory, which are not as famous as his compatriots, but they do exist. And while he was not one of the Sons of Liberty who dumped the tea into the harbor, he became the real de facto leader in the Continental Congress and is known as the father of American independence. And as we've been touring, we've been joking that it is quite possible that the other founding fathers at the Continental Congress only signed the Declaration of Independence to shut John up, because he basically harangued them to make them recognize that independence was the way to go, when a lot of them still were trying to offer olive branches to Great Britain. He wasn't an ideologue, though. He knew that there needed to be a strategy here, and that to save Massachusetts, other colonies needed to be involved and to feel very important in the effort, and that's probably why he put forward George Washington as the commander of the Continental Army.
And late in the war, as commissioner to France, he helped win the French allies that would make America winning the Revolutionary War possible. Without the French, there is arguably no United States of America. He was one of the negotiators of the Treaty of Paris that ended the American Revolution and that confirmed British acceptance of American independence. And there's a really funny story about this. If you like pettiness in history, this is the perfect story for you. If you've ever seen the portrait of the Treaty of Paris negotiators, you will know exactly how the British felt about American independence. All of the negotiators from both sides were supposed to sit for this portrait. So the Americans are in the portrait, they're sitting at the table, the treaty's rolled out, and on the other side are a bunch of gray blobs where the British negotiators were supposed to be, but they never showed up to sit for the portrait. So they might have accepted American independence, but they did it begrudgingly at best. And I just think that's the cutest story of the British being surly about this. He was the diplomat who, almost entirely of his own volition, secured the assistance and support of the Dutch Republic in the form of financial aid and loans that were needed to keep the actual American government afloat. And much to the irritation of the British, he was appointed as our first ambassador to Great Britain, which was, I think, an appointment that absolutely no American envied him for having to do.
And speaking of pettiness, sometimes the British either could not remember or pretended they could not remember if he was Sam Adams or John Adams.
And they didn't like him either way.
So upon his return from his foreign service, he became our first vice president. And then when Washington retired, he became our second president. He was also, crucially, the first president to lose to an opposing political party. And that may not sound like much of an accomplishment, but it put him in a position to do arguably the best service he could have ever done for the young republic. And that is that he, despite what he thought were some unfair aspects of the election, he upheld the rule of law. He ensured a peaceful transfer of power. And this is important because there had been a tie between Aaron Burr and Thomas Jefferson because of a constitutional quirk at the time that has since been resolved. He had an opportunity to make mischief, and he didn't. And I feel like as mad as he was about the election, it shows you what a true patriot he was, because he got in that carriage and he rolled away and set a world-changing precedent. And so even though that may not be, he might not have thought of that as his greatest accomplishment, it may be.
Historians think this is such a pivotal moment in U.S. history that they refer to this as the Revolution of 1800.
One final note about John Adams, because it's important and it speaks to the character of the man that Abigail loved. He and his son, John Quincy Adams, or John Quincy Adams, we're not sure now that we've been here. He and his son were the only two of the first 12 presidents who did not own people and who opposed the institution of slavery.
That's really something to think about. So, in short, John was a very accomplished man. And in Abigail, he found his perfect match. Abigail and John's marriage was a true love match. It was a great American love story. Although initially Abigail was not very impressed with John, and he also wasn't very impressed by her. And then today at the Quincy house, we found out, that John was going after one of the Quincy girls, and she pushed him towards Abigail. So
we didn't know
like the Real House husbands
of Quincy.
Of Revolution America or something. Anyway, we thought that was a delightful little story, but they do eventually find their way to each other, and they do initially get over this annoying of each other that they did when they were a bit younger. And Abigail very much grew to admire his intelligence, his ambition, his forthrightness, his directness, his quick wit. They loved to discuss books and politics. They loved to debate the ideas of the day. And they really shared similar moral and political ideals. And for Abigail, one of the most important of those ideals was that John respected the idea that women could be intelligent, and he encouraged her strong opinions. And that was good, because Abigail was very opinionated. She was well-read. She was unafraid to voice her mind. In the letters, which I'm sure lots of you have taken a look at, it's really delightful, and it was kind of surprising to see how tart and funny she could be. She did not suffer fools, and she did not hold back from saying what she had to say. She was actually, in many ways, more radical than her husband. She would often get to a position much faster, and it might take him a little bit of of thinking and hemming and hawing to land at the same place. The most famous example of this occurs in one of her letters, the most famous one probably, from March 31st, 1776, in which she admonishes John to remember the ladies informing the new government and its laws. And of course, that wasn't all she had to say in that letter, though it is what most people know about that letter.
And that's also where the little placard ends at your monument where the statue of Abigail is. So now she's going to read you the rest of the quote.
So this is what she goes on to warn John. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. Extraordinary words from a 1776 woman. Now, she was disappointed in John's reply, partly because he was dismissive and partly because he was joking with her as if she had told a joke, which she had not. But generally speaking, she never held herself back from asserting herself or advising him. And overall, they really did have a partnership that was born of respect and admiration, even as war and nation building kept them apart for years at a time.
And in those separations, we find some of Abigail's most heroic traits that made us want to write a novel about her. While John was away doing the business of the nation, Abigail was essentially a single mother. She was raising 4 children in the middle of a war zone. And even though some of her letters can be a little bit stern in the fashion of 18th century, she clearly has a soft heart for them. She calls them her little charmers and our little flock. And she was also responsible for making sure the farm continued to run. She had to collect money, rents from the tenants, and she had to oversee the farm laborers. And these were gentlemen who did not necessarily want to take direction from a woman. So this added a whole another level of difficulty onto her responsibilities. She also faced several epidemics alone. She lost her mother to dysentery and then decided that she was going to have herself and her children inoculated against smallpox. And she did not tell John about this beforehand. Now, she did know that he was a strong supporter of inoculation, but there were serious dangers to this procedure at the time, and I think she did not want to worry him while he was helping Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence. So she meant to get it all done and then emerge safely and let him know, but someone spilled the beans to him, and so he wrote frantically with worry. Now, she also made all the arrangements for children's education, which was pretty difficult for boys during war, but almost impossible for girls. And Abigail was very concerned about the education of her eldest daughter, Nabby. This is a theme that she would return to again and again in her letters about how upset she was that there weren't enough opportunities for girls and young women to receive a proper education in the United States. She would nag John about this, and she would say, if we mean to have philosophers and statesmen in this country, we need to have learned women. To sort of get around these problems, though, she resorted to a partnership of a sort with another Massachusetts petticoat patriot named Mercy Otis Warren, who was her good friend and our very first American historian, and a woman at that. And she ensured that her daughter would be educated in part and tutored by Mercy so that Nabby could get an education in history and literature and politics that was otherwise not available to girls. She also made really daring choices about her son. She had to choose, along with John, to allow her boys, who were quite young, to travel across a war-torn sea. It was extremely perilous. If John had been captured by the British, he may have been hanged, certainly imprisoned, and then what would the fate of her boys be? She also worried about their morals and their without a mother's guidance in Europe. But she wrote that this was the world they would have to live in, and that to keep them from it would be to fasten a padlock on the mind, and that's not something she would do, which really I thought was very moving and courageous and brave. Now, because John was away doing the business of the country, it meant that he couldn't practice law. So it meant they had some financial hardships to deal with, which ultimately put Abigail in the position of also having to support her family and find extra money. And she approached this problem with a surprising amount of entrepreneurial spirit. You might remember in the musical 1776 that Abigail is nagging him about sending him her pins. It wasn't just because she needed to sew. She was selling those pins and making a profit. And so you might have heard the phrase pin money. She did not tell John about all this money that she was making. She started a mercantile business importing goods for resale. She recruited other women in her neighborhood to help her make these sales, which is pretty extraordinary considering that women had a lot of difficulty doing any business at all because they couldn't own property. And so she often had to recruit her cousin, Cotton Tufts. I love that name, Cotton Tufts, to help her be the man who would sign things and arrange things for her. She eventually made investments that would pay off big. And this was good because a lot of families emerged from the American Revolution financially ruined, whereas the Adamses emerged from the war relatively stable due to Abigail's efforts. Now, all of these things, she's handling all of this. So it would naturally put a strain on any marriage. But there was an additional thing that caused a strain in their marriage. And that was that the communication, writing letters back and forth across this war-torn sea, was really fraught. A lot of letters were captured or sunk. And John Adams realized correctly when he was in France and other places in Europe that he was surrounded by spies. And that when his letters got captured, if there was something juicy in them, the British would publish it to humiliate him. And being the man that he was, he decided to adopt a policy of being very clipped and, sort of only the facts when he would write to Abigail, which really hurt her feelings. And she writes a number of letters where she's beseeching him to give her some tenderness. And she's worrying that she doesn't even know him anymore, that he may have changed hearts with a cold Laplander. And while this is happening, another man enters the picture. This was a shock for us. I don't know if it was a shock to you guys, but I'd never heard of James Lovell before. Have you heard of him? Okay. Well, he was putting moves on Abigail in these letters because she was depending on him for news and John's paychecks. And if you've seen the Hamilton musical, you know that Alexander Hamilton was flirting with his sister-in-law by way of a comma. James Lovell was flirting with Abigail by way of an apostrophe. So you'll have to read the book to find out more. But eventually, I think Abigail, our interpretation is that she seemed to have welcomed having an admirer at first, and then started to see that this could be a scandal and that he was really crossing the line with her. And so she really rose to the occasion. She cut that off. And in the end, she rose to the occasion of every challenge that was thrown at her. She made really a heroic effort to sustain her marriage and to take care of her little family.
And she did the same to birth and raise the new nation. One of the ways that she began to solidify her thinking about what the new nation might need, how the women could support it, what the social side of politics might look like, was in comparison to what she was seeing in Europe when she traveled with John for about 5 years, living in France, the Netherlands, and England. And she also develops a friendship, a very close friendship indeed, with Thomas Jefferson, who was the minister to France during the same period. And with him, she would discuss what they were seeing and observing of European life. They also like to discuss books and trade gardening tips. And then once both of his daughters had joined him overseas, she helped sort of take care of getting them appropriate clothing and letting them know how the social mores of France worked, because of course by that time he had long been a widower. But there was this experience in Europe really gave her these important points of comparison that helped her decide what she thought was good in the way that America was forming, and what things might have been good in Europe that she could implement or change to suit the American style. So one observation, she was absolutely shocked by the disparity of wealth in European society. She found that just the vast inequalities were just shocking to her. She was disgusted by what she viewed as some of the lewd manners and just outright hedonism of the aristocrats. And we always say in our books, like, the crazier something seems, the more likely it is to be true. And this was the case with some of the things that she observed with these aristocratic people doing in public at some of these parties and salons and the like. So you'll see some of those recounted in the book. She thought court life was overly hierarchical, it was formal and rigid, and it was, as a result, really superficial. You couldn't really, get to know people or really exchange ideas and thoughts when you were so beholden to these very strict rules of protocol. And in England, she was initially very perplexed and then amused by the ladies' habit of using calling cards. So if somebody would come to visit Abigail and she wasn't dressed or she wasn't home, the butler would say she's not home, and the lady would leave a card. And now Abigail would be beholden to return that visit. But if she went to that lady's house and that lady wasn't dressed or wasn't home, then she would say, not home. And Abigail said, well, when does it end? If you just keep going, it's like a circle. You never get out of it. So eventually she found this very, very amusing. But it was a particular point of comparison that she then used to begin to implement what historians refer to as the parlor politics of the early Republican capitals. Instead of these calling cards, she advised Mrs. Washington and the other ladies of Washington's cabinet that maybe instead they could hold these parties called levees, and that each of the ladies of the cabinet could have a different evening of the week. And that way all the people that might want to come to you or talk to you come to you. And Abigail really liked this, because one of the things she really loved about being the second lady was that she was Martha Washington's right-hand woman and got to sit next to Martha on the dais. And at one point she shows up and there's another lady sitting in Abigail's chair. And she was absolutely tickled when President Washington escorted that lady away, saying that that was Mrs. Adams's chair, and then she could take her rightful place on the dais. She really enjoyed that. But, some of this stuff sounds, fluffy or unimportant or superficial, but think about this. The founding documents of our country lay out the big picture ideals of what this country stands for, and the structure of the government, the branches, the officers, the length of the terms, these kinds of things. But very little about the day-to-day functioning of the government is laid out in any of this. The founding generation is making this all up out of whole cloth. And every single decision becomes fraught with significance. Do you curtsy to the president and first lady? Do you, what title do you use for the president? Is Your Excellency or Lady Washington, are those too monarchical or aristocratic for a new Republican government? And this is the origin of political parties, because as people began to fall into camps on all these questions about the day-to-day implementation, these political parties began to develop some that leaned more towards maybe the British way of doing things without going all the way to monarchical, and some that started to lean more in the direction of the way the French were doing things, especially as the French Revolution got more and more radical. And so, Abigail is looking at what she's seeing around her in Europe. She's borrowing what she can and helping to have it implemented back home. She's discarding what she thinks is not right, but she becomes very certain that the American style was more simplistic, it was more democratic, it was more egalitarian, and it was the better way to do things. And so that is, sort of a political education by comparison that she received in Europe.
Now, a fun fact that we like to say, Abigail Adams was our first second lady and our second first lady. As first lady to John Adams, she was so influential that friends and enemies referred to her sometimes as Mrs. President. This is partly because she did become John Adams' primary political advisor. But there's a reason for this too, and that is that John didn't feel like he could trust the men in his cabinet. He had to sort of ensure continuity of government. He kept on Washington's cabinet, and those men were not loyal to him. They were loyal to Alexander Hamilton. Now, we have written a whole book on Alexander Hamilton. We are great fans of Alexander Hamilton, but when you look at him from the perspective of the Adams family, he's the devil. And so he doesn't feel like he can trust his cabinet, so he turns to Abigail. And usually she gave him wonderfully wise counsel, but sometimes she got things wrong, in our opinion. One of the things we think she got wrong is that she was a supporter of the Alien and Sedition Act, which she thought were necessary wartime measures. She did not anticipate they would be used outside of wartime, and they were extremely unpopular even during her time. During the Adams administration, there were journalists who were in prison. Abigail didn't necessarily think that was a bad idea. And so she advised John to sign the Alien and Sedition Acts. He did, and we have been arguing about them ever since. So that's one thing where she did us dirty. Now, I did mention before that as First Lady, she and John were the first sort of couple to serve in what is now Washington, D.C. They called it Washington City then. And when she got there in 1800, she found a veritable wilderness. She said it was a city in name only. She called Georgetown a dirty hole. She had to hang her laundry, I think in the East Room, was it? And she was very upset to see all the enslaved labor being put to work to build the Capitol. The whole idea of unfree people being used to build a capital for a free republic was not lost on her. Now, in that same year of 1800, that is when her husband lost re-election, but he lost to Thomas Jefferson, just to rub salt in the wound, because that was their old dear friend who had now been turned into a bitter political rival.
Now, in retirement, Abigail Adams had something that she'd never had before: 17 years of companionship with her husband, John. She cherished her time with him. They worked the farm together. They planted gardens together. They spent a lot of time with their grandchildren, some of whom they actually took in. And their home at Peacefield really became a center of family and community. And that was extremely important to Abigail. Despite all that, though, she did remain politically connected. She corresponded sometimes with Dolly Madison. She keenly followed and gave advice on her son, John Quincy's diplomatic career. They did have a very sweet relationship, and he was open to her advice. But as with all children, I know this to be true. There is a point at which they want you to stop talking and stop advising them because they know what they're doing. And there was a little bit of that in their relationship, too. Ultimately, she re-began a correspondence with Thomas Jefferson when she sent him condolences upon the death of his second daughter, Polly. Now, that correspondence didn't necessarily lead to reconciliation between them.
It did not go well.
And possibly Abigail never forgave him, but it did ultimately open the door to John and Tom beginning to correspond again. Because if you think about it, they're two of the last of their generation who underwent this incredibly unique and emotional and compelling experience of fighting a war for revolution or for independence, winning that war, and then getting to create right from scratch what your whole new government would be. And that brings them back together at the end of their lives until they famously die within hours of one another on July 4th, 1826, the 50th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. A little bit of trivia that always kind of gives me goosebumps to think about that moment of synchronicity, I guess. But it wasn't a period that was entirely free from struggle, not in their family and not in the country. In her family, Abigail suffered a number of quite devastating losses during this period, the period that roughly overlaps with the War of 1812. The most devastating of which quite possibly being when her daughter Nabby was diagnosed with breast cancer and underwent one of the first mastectomy surgeries in all of U.S. history at the house at Peacefield. Now, Stephanie and I talk a lot about fun synchronicities that happen while we're researching and writing our books. Sometimes we'll make a character up. Like in America's First Daughter, we made up that Patsy Jefferson had a man that she cared for and he cared for her, but for some reason they couldn't be together. And then later we find the real life William Short, who was Jefferson's secretary, and who there is more than a little evidence that something like this may actually have happened. So it's so cool because you sort of feel like you're channeling the past. Somehow you knew that thing before you actually found the proof of it. Another fun example of synchronicities that we've had. We'll go somewhere to one of the historic sites, and something that we used in portraying how the family, moved about the house, or spaces that were important to one person over another, and then we'll find out at the house that we actually guessed that correctly. And those are really fun moments. We had a bit of synchronicity with this book that was less fun for both of us, and that was that in the middle of all this, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I underwent a double mastectomy surgery for my treatment. And it was really, I'm very healthy now, so we're all good to go. But it was so, I think, always surreal to get a cancer diagnosis, but also then to be working on a book about a woman who has what is a pretty unique experience of undergoing a surgery like this and being able to identify with your characters on that level. So, I think that we really connect with the books on a personal level in all these ways, and it's part of why we ultimately love doing what we do.
I think we could have done without the cancer this time. Yeah, we didn't need to experience that one personally. Now, while Abigail was going through these personal difficulties, the country was also facing a serious crisis. The War of 1812, some historians call it the Second War of American Independence, and we think that is true. The British invaded and burned Washington, and the Adamses really worried that this could be the end of the American experiment. Spoiler, it was not. But that was thanks to sacrifices of a new generation. And there's really a lesson for us in that, that our governance and our society isn't a machine that you just flip the switch on and walk away from. It requires participation from ordinary men and women. We all have to contribute to making this machine move forward and make progress. Democracy is a participatory sport, is what I like to say. John and Abigail and the other founders did know that, even though they had some nervousness about direct democracy. And I think that in knowing this, in encouraging new generations to pick up the torch and move forward, in raising John Quincy the way that they did, they left an incredibly powerful legacy for us.
And as for Abigail Adams, she was a voice for her times that is still somehow astonishingly modern. In fact, so much so that we worried while working on the book that readers might think that we purposefully modernized her, but we really didn't have to. She believed in women's equality. She believed in women's education. She was against the institution of slavery. She was willing to go toe-to-toe with some of the biggest minds of the day. And in a time where it wasn't common, this is one of our favorite moments about Abigail Adams, she made a will and left her quite substantial wealth to the other women in her life. If you think about it, by the end of their lives, they hadn't achieved the vote for women. They hadn't achieved any sort of established educational program for women. The institution of slavery was still alive and well at that time. So Abigail realized, despite her advocating and talking to the people in power and doing what she could not affect those things. But that didn't mean she couldn't do anything. And so what she did was ensure that these ladies around her would have a meaningful independence by having financial independence. And so she leaves all of this money to this group of women. And I think that's also a really powerful message about her life, because you may not be able to do or fix everything, but you can do something. Mm-hmm. And I think with her very last act, words, what have you, this is the message that she left for us. And so I think of all the figures of the founding era, she really speaks to us most directly and resonantly about what this year's anniversary might mean, what it means to be an American, and what we as Americans need to do to keep our union ever more perfect.
And on that note, we would like to thank you, and we will be happy to take a few questions if you have them. Oh, yes.
Steal one of the microphones.
Okay.
Yeah, we can also repeat them if that would help.
Okay, great. Questions for our authors?
Okay, yes, ma'am.
The only question, but thank you for the very interesting presentation, but how did the two of you work together? I'm trying to think about two people trying to write a novel. Can you take a few minutes to tell us how you go about it?
We love this question. The question is, how do we work together? How did two people write one novel? The process has changed with each of our books. When we first decided to try writing a novel together, we had never co-written with not only not each other, but no one. So we did, made a pretty big leap of faith, and maybe had just a little bit of hubris that it would all go well, and it did. For all of the novels, we always sort of come to the topic together and shape what the topic is going to be about. We always outline together. And then with the first book, we had like a Google video chat open on both of our computers at our various houses. And let's say Stephanie was drafting chapter 1 and I was drafting chapter 2, and we were talking live to each other about, hey, I found a source that might work better for your chapter, or I found this, I got a plot problem here, can you help me talk it through? And then when we would finish drafting, we would switch and edit freely. And probably 98% of the time, we just accepted all of the other person's changes, because we realized that we had complementary strengths in our styles of writing, and also that we spoke a very similar language in thinking about the craft of writing. And when we disagreed, which didn't happen that often, those were actually exciting moments, because we would talk through what we were each trying to achieve in our way of addressing something, and then we would debate it out and always end up coming up with a third solution that was so much better than what either of us had thought of separately. And those are really exciting because usually when you're writing your own novel by yourself, not only does no one else know your source material as well as you, but nobody else cares about the little factoids and fun trivia that you find. And there's only so much that your spouses, want to hear about what you're finding in the papers. With the Hamilton book, we were under a much tighter deadline. So instead of doing back-to-back chapters, we picked bigger chunks and treated them. And then because of my cancer diagnosis and treatment, this one was the most different in that Stephanie drafted and I did the revision work. And then when we get to copy editing and proofreading, where you can only have one version of the document, we're working on the same computer at the same time, pushing the keyboard back and forth to each other as we think of things we want to try, so that hopefully by the end, we've both substantially worked on every page of the book so that it reads seamlessly, because it should only have one voice, not both of our voices. So that's how our process typically works. Yes, ma'am.
You hit many of the founding fathers, as we call them. What's your next one going to be?
The question is, what is our next project going to be?
Are you going to Monroe, Madison? Well, you can help us out here because we made a proposal to our publisher. They did not like it. They thought it might not be famous enough. So we would like to. We want votes. So if we want you to call out anybody that you would like us to write about, and if it happens to be the person that we want to write about, it gives us ammunition to go back to the publisher and say, but our readers demanded it. So call it out. Who? Dolly Madison.
Louisa Johnson will marry John Quincy.
Oh, yeah, okay. Keep going. Mercy Otis Warren. Yes?
Mercy Otis.
Oh, another one for Mercy. I never heard. That's a new one to us. Okay, after the talk, we
She
want
said
to know.
Hannah Gallatin.
Oh, I know her. Oh, that is interesting. So we don't have a set idea, we don't have an acceptance of our idea yet, but I think these names that we've heard definitely include the people that we most want to write about. So we'll see.
So stay tuned.
Yes.
Sign up for our newsletter or join us on Facebook or whatever, so that you get the news when we can finally share the final idea. Yes, ma'am, in the back.
Thank you so much for looking forward to the book. Since you've been into Abigail Adams' mind, what do you think if she was here tonight and see everything women have been approached since then, what do you think would be her reaction also for what we haven't gotten yet?
So the question is, if Abigail Adams was here now, what do we think she would think of everything that women have been through between then and now, and sort of what women's position in society is now?
I think she would definitely approve. She would be probably impressed at women's fortitude. I think a little sad that it took so long for women to get the vote. Probably extremely pleased by the educational opportunities that are now available to women and how many women actually are taking advantage of that, more than men actually at present. But I think she would warn us not to take anything for granted, that none of these things are for sure, that there can be backslides. In fact, tell them about New Jersey.
There was exactly that in her own lifetime. So in the state constitution of New Jersey in 1776, they extended the right to vote to women. And that lasted for a couple of decades until it was repealed. So in her own lifetime, she saw that women were starting to make some forward progress, but she also, I forget the exact year of the repeal, so I won't say she saw that, but, then it
less
was repealed.
than decades. Like it might have been only a decade. So we can't swear to it. We have to look it up after this. But I think she's right that it was in Abigail's own lifetime that she saw that right taken away.
But the other thing that I would say is that because in 1776 she witnessed at least some women get the right to vote, I think as true as everything that Steph just said is, I think she would also be kind of concerned that about the general issue of the backsliding of rights. Because she saw in her own lifetime that certain things were being achieved. So how can we still be talking about them and debating about them 200 years later? She also would not at all be surprised by the ferocity of partisan politics, because that very much existed in her own time. So that's really interesting to think about. Yes.
I find it fascinating that the two of you have gotten together and are writing these books and things like that, which I found my dear Hamilton to be a joy to you.
Oh, thank you.
And I found it in a thrift store.
Oh,
And
oh, lovely.
reading it and told my husband, you got to read this, and he doesn't read novels. He
Oh.
read the whole thing. But I preface that because I find it fascinating that the two of you have gotten together. Can you go back a little bit further beyond just your writing lives together? How did this come about? That
Okay.
the two of you began, was it a brainstorm somewhere over coffee? How did this happen? Were you both in writing somewhere? Were you novelists in your own right? How did it happen?
So the question is, lady was fascinated that there were two people writing these books. She and her husband read My Dear Hamilton and absolutely loved it. So could we please go even back a little bit further and talk about how we came to even decide to do this together?
So Laura and I had been friends for a long time. We were both members of a writers' organization in Maryland, and we often went to writers' conferences together. And Laura, at the time, was working as a professor of American history at the U.S. Naval Academy. And so after, a couple sessions at, I think it was the New Jersey conference, everything is legal in New Jersey, we were sitting around, and I was asking her how her classes were going, and she was teaching senior seminars on Thomas Jefferson. And I mentioned, oh my God, I would love to write about Thomas Jefferson, but my career at that point, I had written historical fiction in the ancient world, and I'd been really immersed in the ancient world for at least a decade. I really didn't know enough detail about American history to feel comfortable moving into that realm. And of course, she had the expertise. So we started talking about, what could you write about Thomas Jefferson? Everything's been written about him, except we know him as a founding father, but not as a father. So we got this bug in our bonnet, a bee in our bonnet, right? And we raced back to my hotel room, and we started looking up his daughters, and we're getting very excited. Now, there was no biography of Patsy Jefferson at the time, so we were still doing original research till 3 a.m, getting very, very excited. And
there was no alcohol involved whatsoever.
no, we were just high on history. And we decided right then and there that we're going to write this book, and we're going to do it together. And when we woke up the next morning, probably we should have been like, whoa, what were we thinking? That was a crazy idea. What a lark. But no, we were really excited about this, and we really pushed at it. And this is something that, Laura and I have similar passions to the extent that when we did propose this book, we only got one offer for America's First Daughter from one publisher. And let me tell you,
Not a very good offer.
it was terrible. And we were not sure that we could afford to write America's First Daughter because we both had our own separate careers, and this would not be a big enough advance to really justify it. But we were so stubborn and foolish, I guess. we thought, this is going to be fun. We want to do it. We're going to do it anyway. And so we did. And, this was a book that took a little while to get going. It didn't hit the New York Times bestseller list right out of the gate. We actually were sort of selling it out of the backseat of our car for a while in Virginia, and then just word of mouth, it started going and going. And so we've been through a lot together the past, 15 years,
Yes.
and we're still going strong.
He says we have a lot of shared passions, but I've been trying to stop at every historic graveyard that we have passed because I want to see all the winged death head art and all the cool stuff. And she's like, we don't have time. It's too cold. It's raining. It's dark. Like, these are problems, right? But yeah.
All right, I do not share her enthusiasm for the creepy crawlies.
One more question?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
In your book about Abigail, do you go into her life with her own family? I mean, was she influenced by her mother? And also, I have read things about her family, you know, her children. As a matter of fact, one book I thought was fabulous was Descent from Glory. And I kind of got the impression that her own daughter, did she just have one daughter?
One who survived to adulthood.
That she was not a very liberated person. Is that true? And, you know, what about Abigail's mother? Did she instill these values in her? And why couldn't Abigail instill them in her daughter?
So the question is, what in the book involves the mother, the daughter, Abigail's bigger family, and why did Nabby seem to be more conservative? Why were Abigail and John not able to instill some of the progressive things sort of into Nabby that they themselves held? One flippant answer, I promise there'll be a better answer, is imagine having Abigail and John as your parents. Like, they never stopped talking. And I think Nabby was like an inherently more reserved person. Like, who could get a word in edgewise around there? So we joke about that one all the time. That's not the serious answer, though.
So Abigail's mother was the wife of a parson, and so she was very much sort of a caretaker persona. I think Abigail may have been more influenced in terms of her independence by her grandmother, whose name I believe was Elizabeth Quincy. And Abigail seems to have come by a lot of her independence by nature. So she was always sort of a high-strung girl, and there were family members who worried that she might grow up to be a very bad woman. And so in terms of, I think it's probably more nature than nurture with her family, because they did not give her or her sisters a formal education, although the girls tried to sort of educate each other and make sort of a learning circle. Now, when it came to her own daughter, I'm not sure that I would say that Nabby was more conservative. She definitely was more reserved than Abigail, and she was not particularly interested in going into politics or being involved in the way that her mother was, probably because she saw the price that had to be paid. But there is something that I think people often misunderstand about Nabby. She was very loyal to her husband, who, let's generously say, had a troubled history. And it's common for a modern person to look at the scenario and say, she should have left him. That's what a liberated woman would do. But then you think about the example that was set by her mother. Her mother was largely abandoned for about 10 years and stuck by John Adams and lived through all those hardships. And I feel like Nabby thought that that is what a moral wife does, and that she had that strength and that fortitude. And when you see the way that she faced the illness in her life, I think you see some of Abigail's strength coming through. So maybe not in the same ways was she as strong as Abigail, but I think she had her own strength.
Did you ever read the book, Descent from Glory?
I have not, but now it's on my to-be-read list.
It was really amazing. Powerful.
The book that's being recommended is
Descent from Glory.
Descent from Glory, about the family.
Is that something that you've all read? Is that something people who read who live here? Okay.
We'll have to look into that one. Well, thank you so much for welcoming us here.